And here we are for an episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. It's Monday, and we officially now have 3 microphones. We have 3 mics, and they sound crystal clear. Very happy about this. Hello, everyone. We're glad that you could join us. This is Dualistic Unity Raw, I believe, episode 202. We recorded episode 38 of season 6 earlier today, wherein we made the announcement that Dualistic Unity Raw is in for an upcoming cull. That's right. Its days are numbered. Not Raw itself, but there are limitations when it comes to the number of podcast episodes that we can actually host on our podcast platform. We are now over 550 episodes, which means that we are rapidly approaching that limit. And so we've decided that we're going to take the older episodes of Dualistic Unity Raw, which is always off the cuff, based on what we're dealing with in the day, in the moment. And we're going to remove them from the platform. We're going to remove them from the public, and we're going to move them over to Patreon, where they can be listened to as podcast episodes. Patreon now offers podcasts, so you can listen to it on your Patreon app and listen to it as though it is a podcast episode, just like you would on Spotify or iTunes. And so we're going to be doing that in the next couple of weeks here. If you haven't listened to episodes 1 through 100 of Dualistic Unity Raw, now's your chance.
Get on it real quick before it is going to cost you at least $5 to do so.
100 episodes in 2 weeks, you can do it.
Yeah, or the free trial, which we have on tier 2 also. You can hop in there and just kind of watch as many as you possibly can in that week if you really want to get through to it. But yeah, it's that'll be cool to see how that plays out for sure. But yeah, these Raw episodes are always a lot of fun.
They are. Considering now we can all speak at the same time.
Indeed.
Yeah.
See, just like that. And it's not confusing whatsoever.
Right. We haven't been able to have that, especially with Zoom, too, because we'll have, the back and the forth. Usually it's tough for people to talk.
Absolutely. It's very, very tough. And with the single mic that we've been all sharing, we've been hesitant because we don't want to overwhelm the other person who's talking, where in this case we all have equal access to a microphone now.
Me too.
It's great. It's great. And if you are our guest, well, you'll have your own microphone. The 4 of us will have microphones.
Oh yeah, and we'll be able to get some set up probably in my living room at some point.
If
Very
in our
nice.
studio, a nice little studio setup would be dope. But that's all in the future. For now, what we're doing is actually, I'm excited to say, we've finalized a good portion of our investor documentation. We're in the process of issuing our share certificates to almost everybody. We're just waiting for the final paperwork on just a few people. This is incredibly exciting. It's incredibly exciting. We are in the process, just before doing this, of finding clips, 2 to 4 minute clips of the podcast that clearly expresses something that we talk about frequently, a difference between the common dialogue and our dialogue. And we're going to be throwing some advertising money behind that. We're actually going to be promoting this to a target audience rather than just throwing messages in a bottle out into the ocean and waiting for it to arrive anywhere that it arrives. We are actually going to be launching messages in a bottle 5 per second. There's 5 messages, just because, throwing out a bunch in there. And again, I want anybody who's listening to recognize they're not actually messages in a bottle. We're using the internet. There are no bottles polluting the water.
Just to be clear, no additional plastic use being dumped into the ocean,
right.
But it'll be cool to be able to curate those a little bit more, because that season 5 episode 1 we went into quite a number of things that are interesting to look at and not things that make people very comfortable. That recognition that that story they have about themselves, their perception of themselves, is a veil to reality more than it is some sort of guide. It can get very much in the way of you being able to just be yourself and express yourself. And the more that focus becomes the most important thing in your life, instead of just being yourself and letting the chips fall, which is what you're doing anyway. It's just what you are. It really is. It's what you are when you're not trying to be anything at all. And Levi mentioned in one of his recent episodes of Levi with Levi.
Shout out to Levi.
Out to Levi. That, yeah, being yourself isn't something that you can try to be. Even telling someone to just be themselves it's just
Pointless.
stop trying to be anything at all.
Because they were the whole time.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing we don't
entire
like, right?
time.
Like, and this is kind of the danger, and we've talked about this, is all of a sudden you start telling yourself that you've never been yourself. And that becomes a new narrative. Now you're yourself looking at a narrative that you've never been yourself. But you've always been yourself. You've always been yourself. Regardless of the part you're playing, you're still you playing it. It's just that you start to confuse the reality of you for the thought of you.
For the role, the role that you're playing, trying to play, trying to be, trying to become. And it can become this sort of feeling like when you can tell that you're thinking about yourself, like it's almost like a pulsating a bit. Because anytime you're thinking or thinking excessively, a lot of times it has to do with yourself, how you're doing, measuring your progress, measuring, assuming things, mostly trying to predict the future, trying to predict outcomes. It's like that's not possible, though. Like you can't actually do that, but you can spend a lot of time using that ability to, imagine situations and scenarios to inform, your choices right now, but none of them are ever guarantees. And so you don't get that sense of control when you really look at that there are no outcomes that are actually guaranteed. All you got is your influence right now, but there isn't a guarantee of like the next step with that. Correct. It's all a question mark. And as you become, more of a question mark to yourself, like even being able to, imagine your face, it's like that's not necessary for your interactions. Like it's not necessary for the way that you interact with the world, but it's also not about, doing that purposefully, I guess. Mm-hmm. A lot of it is about just not making it the focus one way or the other and seeing that, like, yeah, you exist out here. And this is just your thing that allows you to exist out here. But, you're the body as well. But it's like how much focus is your attention on, this versus this.
Mm-hmm. How much of your experience feels like a final answer you're in conflict with versus feeling like a question you don't have to answer? Life has very much felt like I was a final answer. The answer was I wasn't enough. The answer was I couldn't handle this. The answer was I needed control, that I was terrified. But it felt like that was the final answer to a question I wasn't sure about. And now it feels like I am experiencing being a question without needing an answer. And it almost feels like hopping from question to question. Where's the priority? What's the focus? What's available? What's happening right now? What am I so focused on? And that it just feels like hopping from each of those questions to the next one without really being too anxious or without needing a guaranteed answer. And before, it felt like I was that final answer that offered a guarantee, but it never felt like the answer was complete.
Never. It always felt like there was something missing there. Like you weren't quite enough because you can't ever answer that question. We'll make these crazy attempts to do so. It's like all of our thoughts can be surround trying to answer that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have found the answer so long as nobody adds any additional information.
Mm-hmm. A final answer.
That's really what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I have the answer. Shut up. That's pretty much it. Don't give me any more considerations. And that's exactly what we do. That's what we do. We cling on to an answer, and then we just avoid additional considerations, and we defend that. I had a conversation with a Christian this morning who was saying exactly that, right? Like, well, I believe in Jesus. I believe in Jesus. It's like, right, but you don't know Jesus. I believe in Jesus. It's like, whoa. And that's pretty much it. It's just like, because you don't want to even look at that question. You don't even want to look at the question. Even the idea that the resurrection of Jesus Christ, no historical evidence at all. None. And I know the argument for Christians is, and this is literally the basis of their faith, right? But his apostles were willing to die under the belief that Jesus resurrected. It's like, that is still not evidence. I mean, there's a number of people who believe Santa comes down the chimney every year. And depending on how ardent a believer they are and how young they are in terms of egotistical development, they'll take that shit to the grave.
Yeah.
Because they really want to believe that they're Santa, right? That's not a measurement of truth by any means whatsoever. But even the possibility that maybe the story of super zombie Jesus isn't real, just ask yourself, maybe it's not. If immediately your entire sense of certainty starts to come apart, like if you start to feel terrified at that, that is a real good reason to accept that possibility. Because otherwise you're just going to block everything out. You're going to block everything out because it threatens your sense of safety, even though that sense of safety has now become a sense of danger because you have to defend it.
Yeah, because then you're always defending it all the time. Like everything that you do, the way that you live, the way that you interact, the people that you interact with. Hello from Australia.
We got a hello from Australia in the comments
Sebastian.
section. Hello
Down
from
under.
Australia.
Love it.
Like everything, your entire life can circle around that. That's the answer, and therefore I'm living the right way, and it makes your world so small too. As much as it feels like it's it's expanded, it's big, like you can be so hesitant to try new things, to jump into new experiences because it may not match your existing idea of yourself. It's like it becomes either hatred of that idea or love of that idea. And if it's a hatred, then it's like, but it's an answer, then there's responses to that. And if it's a love of it and that's the final answer, then it becomes maintenance, and your world becomes very small because you got to maintain it. I guess unless trying new things is a component of that sort of existing idea that you have. But if it's, relatively fragile and there isn't a whole lot of faith in yourself with it, then it can become this thing that imprisons you. Like it imprisons you in a sense, or at least not imprisons, because that's like victim mentality sort of thing. It's just blinds you. But it's a continuous focus,
Well, who needs faith when you've got guarantees, man?
Yeah.
I say that, and it sounds like a sales pitch, but that's almost what it's like when you're hearing how people defend their quote unquote faith with their certain promise of an afterlife. And it's like, I don't think that's how faith is supposed to work, is with guarantees and promises and assurances. It's like faith is not having that certainty, not having that promise, and trusting yourself to move forward without any guarantees, without knowing that it's going to quote unquote work out in the end or afterlife, if that's what you think the end is. But it's like, well, that's another thing that is just up for exploration, is like, what is this end, right? Because when I'm seeing like the quote unquote example, like the lion eating the gazelle, the lion's not eating a corpse of a gazelle, the lion is eating living meat. So life is always feeding life. So where is this end that we're talking about? Because it always seems like, although we may call things death and dying, it's still life converting into another shape of a life form. But there is no end. And so that's why I like I think, is it the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail?
Yeah.
I love that symbology, because it's like it's like it's almost implying that there is no such thing as death, and death only exists in concept. So if we're never dying and it's always just life changing shape, but it's always life feeding life, then where is this end that we're so afraid of?
Yeah, it's like it becomes, if death is the ultimate sort of question mark, and that's the thing that we want answered, but
That's what religion is supposedly answering.
oh, big time. But like it, beyond that, it's like you're a question mark too. The next step, the next moment, the next experience is a question mark as well. It's not just death is the one that we feel like, we can't think past. It's like it's darkness. But that, like, looking at that and being cool with that and being like, oh, that's okay for it to remain a question mark. You can bring that into the experience that you're having right now too. It's like the next thing. You can, have plans, have structures and all that, but when it comes to being you, like, you can be that question mark moment to moment to yourself even, and just continue to move through your experience and go through things without needing to continuously try to answer it. Because it's like if you're trying to answer everything and come up with, a guarantee, then you're going to tie yourself up. You're going to distract yourself. Just continue to distract yourself from the experience that you're having right now. And like growing up, I looked at, it was always looking forward to something, like looking forward or being afraid of something in the future. And it's just a distraction, from just being willing to be uncertain right now. So often because you have such a, strong idea. That's the focus.
I do want to say it wasn't always that. Yeah, I mean, it's tempting to look back at our lives and go, it was always not being present. It was always looking forward. It was always looking back. It was always doing this. And again, like, I'm grateful for my time as a parent, watching my child grow up, recognizing that those priorities take time to settle in. Like, they really are learned. They're learned. It might just be that those are the memories that stick out the most right now because you're having issues accepting them. You're having issues looking at the time periods where you did make the trajectory into the future your priority. And you don't like those decisions. But those decisions are now lending wisdom to the decisions that you can now make. They're informing the perspective that you are just starting to explore now. There is nothing wrong with that period of your life where you were lost in the idea of yourself, or you were trying to be more. There's nothing wrong with that period. But it's very easy to think that there is. And when you do judge those periods and you look back at your life, they're all you'll see, despite the fact that they were actually a really small percentage of the moment-to-moment existence that you experienced, which was often just sitting in a room or being out doing what you were doing. Even for somebody like yourself, Andrew, a good example would be baseball. At one point, baseball became a ticket to somewhere. But before that, you just liked playing baseball. That's how it became a ticket to somewhere, was your enthusiasm for it. So it wasn't always that. And it doesn't have to always be that now. But you don't get to make that choice until you recognize that it became that for a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. And recognizing that can go for anything, if that wholehearted focus is on how much you feel like you've done incorrectly, they can feel like right now you have to do something to, make up for it additionally outside of just not making it about you in the moment, and like not focusing on something that like you have to do or has to happen to you. It can just be like, you involved in the situation that you're in and paying attention to it, like without, because again, the question mark, if we try and fill that in, then there's all sorts of things that can stem from that based on what our perception of just the experience we're having in the moment is. And if there aren't so many assumptions at all, like period, about anything about your experience, like what's left is your experience and your ability to make the most of it. It's like, and you always have that opportunity. to make the most of it. It's like there's no guarantees of
But you've always been
anything
doing that
beyond
too.
that.
Yeah.
See, that's the
It's not
thing.
a
Yeah.
new thing necessarily.
Even self-destructive habits are making the most of it based on your priorities at the time. It's hard to remember that
Mhm.
that the periods of your life that were harder were the result of you making the most of it according to what you thought that meant. And that's what changes over
Mhm.
time. What does making the most of it really mean? Does it mean wringing every drop out of it to make sure you get everything for you? Or
Squeeze the
does
orange
making the
of
most
life.
of it actually mean being in it, paying attention to it, not having so much of your own need and selfishness in the way, not having so much of a trajectory? What does making the most mean? Because you've always been doing that. You've always been making the most of your life. It's just what that means that's been changing.
Mhm.
Yeah. And like just the willingness to admit that like you're enough as you are, like there isn't one side or the other, like you're enough, period, but not more than that. Like you're enough but not special. Like you're good just like everyone else. Everyone else is also enough. And you can like if you don't feel like you're enough, which can be a big part of growing up, like all of the reasons, all of the rules, all of the things that you have to follow and focus on to be enough, check all the boxes, and then you start building things in your teenage years on top of that assumption that you're not and then you have to keep doing those things to feel like you are. But either way, it's going to blind you because the illusion is that you're not, like you are. And so even deep down, stepping into uncertainty, going into new situations, like that's appropriate to that situation, like that's applicable to that situation, even when it's like, you know, something you're afraid of, like karaoke. We do it all the time. Great example. Like that, you showing up however you show up to that is appropriate. Like you're enough in that. You don't know the ripples that are going to be made from you, you know, crushing the song or you singing out of key the whole time. Like it's still not in control. It's still, you can assume that you have it as you go, but it'll discount, you know, the sensitivity that you have to the experience that you're having, the influence, the potential to influence things as you go based on that, you know, based on how focused on yourself you are, how focused on the certainty of previous situations you are. Big swing.
I like that it was said, you know, that for the most part, it feels like we're always in a room. And the room just used to be, the room just used to have no walls. And then we added walls. And now, you know, we feel like the rooms are so small, like we're in this bedroom. And it's like, it feels like that's all that there is. But metaphorically, it feels like the room is all of existence, the entire universe, every single bit. There is every single character, plant, animal, human, all of it. Everything feels like it's in this giant room that is existence. And depending on what I'm focusing on, that influences the size of the room, metaphorically, that I'm living in. You know, so right now, although I'm sitting in this room with the three of you, I am thinking of other people. I am thinking of other people outside of this quote unquote room. So in the room of my awareness, in the room of my attention, it's a lot larger than the physical room that I'm sitting in. Although sometimes they're identical and it feels like I'm only sitting in the physical room that I'm in. But that's just a matter of what is the perspective, what is the priority, what are the considerations, because I feel like I'm sitting in space for both rooms. I'm in this room with you, sitting on this chair, feeling the wood of the chair that I'm sitting on, and feeling the presence of a friend that I just spoke to, and feeling the people that we're going to be seeing at the corner lounge. So it feels like the attention the room of my attention feels so large, even though physically I very much am paying attention to the physical room that I'm sitting in. And it feels like there is no conflict with that I can feel both to be in the room that I'm physically in and in the room of my attention. There's space for both and attention for both. And there doesn't have to be conflict unless all of a sudden I feel like I'm doing one or both wrong. But that pendulum swings and I can feel both wrong and space to do things right. And when I'm feeling like I'm doing things right, there's space for me to judge what I think I'm doing. And so it just feels like a lot of feels like there's just a lot of movement, and just it feels like being and sitting in more than one room, but not always.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, sometimes it does feel like it's expanded beyond, and it's just your assumptions for sure, but like the willingness to just be like, it's cool to have both going on, like to be attentive to the situation that you're in and know that there's things, you know, in the background, like in the back of your mind, you know, back there, whatever, that are going to keep, you know, running through, rolling through, passing through. And you can just maintain your attention on the experience that you're having and know there's both, like assuming the extreme of one or the other. Like if you're at all, you know, focused on what's going on through your head in your mind, like then you're not being aware of the situation that you're in. And if you're aware of the situation that you're in, like there can still be noise there. Like it's not this extreme one or the other. You know, it's like, I guess, kind of similar to your perception of yourself. It's like, how much is that the focus as you're going through things, like moment to moment, versus when you take a step back and kind of like consider things a little bit. But it's not, again, that's a spectrum too. That's a sliding spectrum as well. Like all of the, where our attention goes and where our focus is, like it's never this sort of black and white thing. You know, it's always a sliding scale, and like it's okay whichever side of it you're, or you know, sliding point of it you're on in the moment, and then in the next moment, and then in the next moment.
Yeah, because I mean, what changes is just, again, your priorities over time. Like you spend a lot of time thinking in your head because you spend a lot of time thinking it's going to get you somewhere, and that's more or less it. I mean, the less that you think that's the case, the more, I guess, the things, quote unquote, in your head pop up as necessary rather than because you're afraid that if they don't, you're not processing something. Right? It's a very different thing. You know, like it's very rare that I find myself thinking about my life. It's very rare I find myself thinking about myself. But when I do, it's because I'm still invested in that thought to some degree. That's all. That's all it is. And I find the farther I go, the longer I live, the less invested I am in whatever is in that quote unquote room, you know, about anybody, whether it's somebody I talked to earlier today, somebody I'm going to talk to later on. Honestly, that room's got nothing of value for me for the most part. I mean, it never does until I'm there. And then everything in the room that's necessary comes to the front. You know, I think that's the whole point, is to recognize there is no internal and external, right? Like there really isn't. You are experiencing your consciousness and your consciousness, whether it's internally or externally. It's the same thing. You are still experiencing yourself. You're still experiencing your consciousness in a different way. It really just comes down to, and again, I cannot stress this enough, how hard are you making this? Because a lot of us, really, our biggest issue is the fact that we just don't want to accept it can be easy to just live our life without taking things personally. We really don't. We want there to be some arduous journey, like, because, and it really helps to keep this in mind. If it's a difficult journey, boy, does that mean you're fucking strong, doesn't it? Right? It's really hard to get. It means you're really bright, right? You've been through a lot of shit. You've paid your dues. All of that. And that's what ultimately you have to let go of, because the fact is that you could take somebody who's been through shit their entire life to finally come to a point where they realize they can let go here and now. And they are exactly the distance from here and now that they were when they were a child. This story doesn't mean a damn thing. Your thoughts about yourself don't mean a damn thing. You can be free right now, but it doesn't mean anything about you. And that's why we don't want it. That's why we don't want it. It doesn't mean anything about me. Right? Oh, but I want to become enlightened. I want to be an authority. I want to be looked at. I want to have people perceive me a certain way. Like, right. How's that going? And that's it. It's just that. Like, it's the simplest thing in the world to not make it about you. It takes effort to make it about you. It really does. But you've been putting so much effort into making it about you that it's almost reflexive. Something happens, you go, that's about me. Not because there's something wrong with you, but because you've spent so long training that response. You've just spent so long believing in that response, having that response conditioned, having that response reinforced. Here's your gold star, Jimmy. This is absolutely about you. This test, this one test right here where you're learning your alphabet, all about you. This establishes your value, Billy. Jimmy just became Billy. The point being, but that's it. We really do. We go through that process of thinking that things really do establish our value. And then we spend all of our time just trying to do that. It never dawns on us that's not something we can do. It never dawns on us that we don't have to do that. That's all it is. But that's why, they find a lot of homeschooled kids have an easier time getting into adult life, right? And it's because adult life is far less in terms of measuring your progress, giving you a value, doing all that. It's not the same as in school, right? Where you're surrounded by your peers and all of you are being graded weekly, right? There's this ongoing measurement of your value against your assumptions of others, right? And in adult life, frankly, nobody gives a shit about you. Really. Like, they just don't. They're too busy taking care of themselves, trying to survive. Sure, there's some competition in there, but only because they were taught that. Only because they were taught that. Imagine how well we would do if we would stop just thinking that our value could be measured. Because that's it. Our value is not measurable. You being good at math and you being good at English doesn't mean that you are more valuable than her, except in terms of how you're doing math, right? But the universe isn't math alone, so the measurement is stupid. At the end of the day, you're going to communicate that math to someone somehow using language. So who's more important now?
Sounds like there might be a balance there. It's like, yeah, and that changes even with, oh my gosh, the ways that the values, like having being able to make a lot of money, something like that. Like someone who has a shitload of, they're good at making money. Because even that, it's like, we think it's so tied to value. Like the top 10 most richest people on earth are the top 10 most valuable is the assumption. But when it is looked at
and point out a broken toilet to one of those people, let's see how valuable they are now.
Straight up. It's like you got $5. You can buy half a sandwich and eat that, but eating the $5 ain't gonna do you shit. But it gives you that sense of control. It's that. It's like, okay, but let's take you out of that situation where you feel all comfortable. What if you feel really good about things right now? What if you lost everything? Would you have faith enough in yourself to be able to live and exist? Because all those things that you have in the way of your ability to like have faith in yourself are, the things that are becoming your I just totally lost my train of thought. I was like, oh, and all those focuses. Yeah. When you do think about, oh, if I lost everything, like all of those things are the things that you're holding on to, the things that are holding you back from being able to even have the space to authentically express yourself. And that's why getting out of your comfort zone and getting into new environments and new situations is so important, because it allows you to see that there's like, so much of the versions that we focus on are just products of our environment. So you have to, there's like a need to be somewhere else for a bit to like see that. It's not a need necessarily, but it allows for more of an opportunity when it isn't being reinforced all the time, because so much of our self is maintained by the things that we do and are able to do throughout the day. You start doing a bunch of stuff that isn't the typical things you do. They aren't the typical things you do. And you'll start to notice, where those fears really are, what you're afraid of. You'll start to notice the things that you didn't think you could do. And some of those childhood sort of memories of your responses initially to those things may pop up. And it's like, oh yeah, there was a process to this building of your response to reality, and the ways that you do that. And if it is habitual to think about yourself, like as soon as you wonder about, letting go, it's like you're going to make that question mark something about you instead of it just being a question mark. It can feel like that sometimes. But
So I love the expression embrace the mystery of life as opposed to trying to solve the mystery of life, because that really is it. It's just like, I don't understand life. I need to come to an understanding. It's like, maybe it's just a process of just continuing through it. Maybe that's all it is. Maybe it's not about coming to some definitive point where you can claim ownership of an answer for everything. It's just another way of sticking a flag in the ground. That's really all it is. I have found Mount Answer. And that's unfortunately never going to help you, because then you got to defend Mount Answer. So you got to make it all about you, and then you're going to name it after you. It's usually how it happens. Absolutely, it's my answer. This was the answer, and that's usually why I tend to avoid spiritual paths or anything like that. Because as soon as somebody's like, "Oh, that sounds a lot like this person," I've usually lost interest. And the reason being is we're all expressing reality. We're all expressing the infinite perspectives of what could happen. We all have access to the same ability to just keep looking at things, to either make it about us or not. And what I always find fascinating about spiritual traditions is that they are based on somebody who didn't typically make it about them personally. And as such, they had incredible insights into how we're all connected, into how people ripple against one another, into how desire, for example, can create suffering. They had insights into these things, and they shared that. But it was only because they just weren't making it so much about themselves. That's it. There was nothing special about them. They just didn't make it so much about themselves. And as a result, they could see more of life and the universe. And this is why I like that quote from Jesus where he's like, narrow is the path, whereas it's wide is the gate and the road traveled by so many, but narrow is the path that few find. He didn't say that only I have found. He didn't say it's my path. He said that few find, which means that it's available to everyone. But are they willing to look? Are they willing to take the responsibility? Are they willing to put themselves aside? This is why I find it so important to remember that regardless of how much they contradict this, most religions really do revolve around faith and humility, which I find incredible because they miss it entirely. Faith is not trying to establish control for yourself. Humility is not making it about yourself at all. Isn't that funny? It's not through trying to be humble in the same way. It's not about trying to be selfless. It's a result. You have faith and you are humble when you recognize that the thoughts about you aren't getting you anywhere, that they are in fact divisive and causing you conflict, and you just get tired of them. And thus you find humility and faith in just going, well, I guess I'm just here then. I'm going to do some stuff. Doesn't mean anything about me. My God, that's amazing. To have a whole life where nothing means anything about you. You can make mistakes. You can offend people if you need to,
Mhm.
or if you don't intend to, you can still offend them. You can learn from that. You can take accountability for offending people.
Mhm.
Doesn't diminish you, doesn't make you less, doesn't make you a bad person. Can you imagine a life where you can just take in information based on the ripples that you create, adjust accordingly, and move through without thinking that your value has in some way been diminished?
Mhm.
What is wrong with that? And I'll tell you right now what's wrong with that. The fact that your value can also not be increased.
Mhm. No, not at all. And so it's not really about doing anything specific one way or the other, because if the focus is entirely on one side of a perspective of yourself, if you feel like you've like done a bunch of things wrong and then you make it about you again, and then you have to do something in response to that, as opposed to seeing that there was a bunch of things happening all the time, and even that thought that you've done a bunch of things wrong, it's like, from that same perspective, you could say you've done a bunch of things right too, and that could be your focus, and there could be appreciation, and it isn't so much a thought of anything. It's where that focus goes. Like, and if the focus is on you, and the focus is on trying to figure out, the next thing, answer the question, you look back to things and the ways that you've lived, and you try and come to some certainty, like you could possibly figure out, that you've done everything great to this point, or you've done everything terribly to this point. It's like, you've done a lot of both things. So to assume that your value, and you have some certainty, and you're like, I know my value now, and because I know my perspective of the previous things, that's going to guarantee it moving forward, and then I can just maintain that. But then it becomes a thought process. How do I best repeat my previous self? How do I, either become more, or, you know, respond not in a way that's putting yourself aside, but respond in a way that's very much about you again, in response to, how many things you've done well or how many things you've done terribly. It's like there's a spectrum of things that you've done throughout your life. To assume that with absolute certainty that, your perspective of yourself to this point is correct one way or the other is absurd. But we'll do it to try and answer the question of what's next, the next thing that is going to happen, to try and to assume that we have, control over it at all. Like we can guarantee something.
Mhm. That doesn't make it any less frequent. The fact that it doesn't work because we just assume that the next time it will. Like, this is it. I've tried 1,000,000 times to get control, but no. The circumstances weren't just right. But this time it's going to work. And yet we keep just disregarding all the price of pursuing control, which is the miserable experience of pursuing control is the price you pay. And yet we just dismiss that like the payout is going to be so worth it, despite even the times where we feel like we have gotten exactly what we wanted. It never was that satisfying, because deep down we know that it never scratched the real itch we were trying to get to, which was that itch of having control, not just feeling like it. And I like that we've been discussing, that a possibility as to why it's so difficult to let go of the ideas, because it's not gonna, there's no credit, to be truly selfless, there's no credit in that. But to appear selfless, there's a lot of credit that you could get. And that's why we think that there are so many mistakes and failures to avoid, because we think that there's this great success, this great victory to be achieved. But what is a mistake other than an attempt that didn't go as expected? What is a failure other than an attempt that didn't go the way that we predicted? And we think that, we can get better or worse. And it's like, yeah, but you just, think about it like this. Wouldn't you just happen to see more of a direction the more you stood on it, the more you kept going in that direction? Is it that you are somehow becoming an expert? in that direction because you spent so much time, or that you just inevitably see more if you kept going in that particular direction, backwards or forwards, conceptually. And so we're never really getting better or worse, but it just seems inevitable. Where the attention is, something will grow. And whether that's a judgment that's growing, or an assumption or a validation, it's just not too surprising that where we put our attention, anything is going to grow from that on both sides of the spectrum.
But that is it. That's exactly what it is. It's the fact that we are really under the impression that we get better.
Mm-hmm.
See, it's just the concept that fucks us up, right? It's not just that we get more proficient at doing the thing, we gain value. And that's where we get confused.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you're more proficient at doing something doesn't mean that you've gained value, simply that you've expressed the value that was already in there.
Mm-hmm.
That's the funniest part about it. It's not like all of a sudden somebody came over and added to your potential.
Yeah.
It was already there.
Mm-hmm.
All it required was time and attention and a willingness to express. That's why it's so important for us to do things, not because we get better at them, but because we realize how potentially we could have been good at them to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
We all have that in us.
Mm-hmm.
Most of what gets in our way is, am I good enough?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than what's next?
Right.
Because that's the obstacle. The obstacle is the idea of us failing. It's not actual failure.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't judge yourself for failing, you could fail all fucking day.
Mm-hmm.
Bring me more failures.
Another attempt. Let's go.
Let's
I'm
go.
back in the ring.
Allow me to burn a few more bridges. Let's fucking do this. Right?
Yeah.
Because what are you learning from it? Everything.
You're building sensitivity.
You're learning about yourself. You're learning about frustration. You're learning about the willingness to be creative, to be imaginative, to look outside the box, maybe to work with other people, maybe to be more independent. You're learning everything about life. Everything. Unless it's about you. Then all you're learning is, why is this so hard? Why me? And it becomes about your little drama rather than the fullness of your life. Because the fullness of your life happens now. It's a fullness that happens now. It's not a fullness that happens while you're sitting in your rocking chair in old age, looking back at all the fulfilling days you had. Because fact is, you can't think about all the fulfilling days you had. And really, are you looking to get old so that way you can look backwards? Is that really what you consider to be a fulfilling life? Right? A fulfilling life is something you feel here and now. And it's a product of the attention you're paying to this moment. Not to your opinion of this moment, not to what this moment means about you or where it's going to get you, but this moment, whatever it is you're doing. You could just be sitting on your ass. How much are you sitting on your ass with attention as opposed to just sitting on your ass? How much are you aware of your body? How much are you aware of your breathing? How much are you aware of the room around you? Or considerations outside of you just trying to feel better? How much of listening to this podcast right now is to help you feel better, and how much of it is just a result of you living your life wanting to listen to something? Because there's a difference. There really is. You don't need anything. And we are happy to just be here with you because we can't teach you anything anyway, right? People are saying that they're very aware of their ass right now, which is great. That is exactly the point, because that's real. Yeah. So why I love that quote, that the stench of my armpits is holier than any church. Mm-hmm. Oh man, I just want to give a giant fist bump to the dude who said that and was ultimately burned at the stake for doing so, because his point was that stench is real. That stench is real and more divine than any fucking holy book, any church, any false idol, any concept of God. The reality of your armpit stench is divine in that it is existence itself.
There's such a difference in that experience, like just being willing to look at that, that like, yeah, no, it is way, actually not even like a little bit holier. Like it's way holier because it's real. Like the church shit is like, the church is just a building with a symbol on it and some stuff inside of it. And like, that's it. That's it in reality, if you're looking at reality and you're not in your head. But like, oh my gosh, the whole world is like only makes sense in your head, in a sense. Like the world that we have right now, the ways that we interact, the quote unquote societal norms, like they only make sense in our head. If you're not in your head so much and you're walking around interacting, it's like you're actually there interacting, when it isn't so much about living up to, or maintaining some perspective of like, oh, you act this way in this situation, you act this way in this situation. It's like, yeah, but how do you act in that situation? Because you can try and be a chameleon your whole life, and that's following, society, all these things, all these, right ways to act, right ways to be, right things to believe, right perspective to have of things that's so siloed. And when you look at it, like, you got to be willing to admit that so much of your environment is impacting, what you think you are, like your upbringing, the experiences that you've had, like they've all played parts in how you think about yourself and the things that you've done, up to this point. The achievements and the failures up to this point define you, but that's not you. Like, it isn't you. And so for there to be some sense of the right thing to do next, it's like, if you're looking back to things that have been, it's like ways that you've acted, interacted, ways that you've thought about yourself, like it doesn't help you right now. You can assume that it helps you stay the same. And that's why a lot of times there's a large aversion to change, despite you being different every moment. Like, you're always different. You're always showing something else. The alternative is to try and show something that isn't really you. But yeah, that's what I got. Appreciating all of the comments.
Absolutely.
Coming through.
We had somebody who said you should go kayaking. We were going to go kayaking. We didn't have a chance last time we went camping, so likely we will in the next time we have a chance. We've also got a few people here just started listening to the podcast a few weeks ago. Welcome. Glad that you could make it. Appreciate you attending the live stream. And just wanted to mention Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern time, we have Putt Party video game that we play on our community Discord. And then 6 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesdays, we do a free group. So if you are new to the podcast and would like to actually have an opportunity to chat with us on the screen in a group Zoom, then definitely check out our free groups on Wednesday. You can register at the website at dualistiCunity.com. I'm enjoying this conversation. It's interesting because the conversation is really not the important part, but the conversation can act as a vehicle. Anybody who knows me in my normal life knows that I don't generally have this conversation. In fact, I become kind of avoidant of the conversation. And somebody's like, so race, meaning of life, this, will be like, yeah, go with that. And I'll just kind of wander off, and it's just because the reality of this, as our friend said in the comment section, is just go kayaking. And that doesn't mean actually kayaking, but it means just go live. Yeah. Like, live your life. If you're going to get up out of bed, pay attention to getting up out of bed. If you're going to go for a walk down the street, pay attention to the walk down the street, as much as you can. And if you're lost in your head while you're walking down the street, pay attention to that. Not to the thoughts in your head, but the fact that you're lost in them. The fact that they are taking you away from the sound of that bird that's chirping at you, from the squirrel that's screaming at you, from the car that just ripped on by and was obnoxiously loud. These are all things that just the very act of paying attention to trains you. It conditions you to no longer be looking for what this moment means about you, but to just look at it. See, it's funny. We forget that. We think, oh, yeah, no, it's all about mindfulness. Yeah, but not for the reason you might think. It's not because mindfulness itself is going to save you or change your life, but because you've spent a lifetime training the opposite. You've spent a lifetime looking forward to see what it means about you and where it would take you. Mindfulness is just a way of you exploring the other equally valid perception that this is enough right now. And then what you find is that there's a balance. You can look forward and not need the end results. You can look forward at infinite possibilities and not need any of them. But just the ability to look forward allows you to appreciate more of what you're experiencing now. But it's not looking forward out of some need so much as imagination, curiosity, creativity. It's not a need. And thus it doesn't take you away. It doesn't, I guess, entice you to pay attention to the thought more than the reality that the thought is supposed to inform. But if you're afraid, you'll focus more on the thoughts of the future, trying desperately to figure out what's coming next. And the problem is that whatever comes next, let's just say everything went to shit. A week from now, everything's about to go to shit. In the next week, all of that training that you do to look forward isn't going to help you a fucking bit when shit falls apart. But if you spent the next week practicing how to make the most of now, to pay attention to now, when shit falls apart, you'll be on top of it.
You'll be ready for it, because that's all you got, like the planning, the thinking, the thought. Like they don't guarantee anything. There's not a single guarantee there whatsoever. And that, oh man, that experience, that desire to assume that you can, like it can become just like, and again, it's not addictive because it's a moment-to-moment choice. It's a moment-to-moment decision to pay more attention there versus here, to pay more attention to things going on in your head, to stories, to try to figure out what's next, as opposed to just being involved in what's the only thing that's ever happening. Because it's like, it's what's happening right now, but it's also the only thing that's ever happening. And so, yeah, to distract yourself from that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do, because there isn't that payoff at all. There isn't payoff whatsoever.
Do you have anything you'd like to add? Then we have a question in the comments section. Would you guys ever do live debates on TikTok? I see a lot of people who have a topic and people request to come on the live. Would be interested in you guys brought Christians on there. So we actually have a call-in show that we do every 2 weeks where we invite anybody to call in. On TikTok, we haven't invited anybody onto the live stream previously. I do know what you're talking about in terms of just people popping on there and having live debates. We're happy to do so. We have been considering a series now for over a year called Masters of the Metaphysical. Very much tongue-in-cheek. I wish I could put it in quotations. And very much for the case of asking spiritual people to come on and have a talk. Not necessarily a debate, I think, is the point I've always had in terms of arranging this segment, which is why we haven't done it yet, I think, because it can become very much whose idea is the right idea, and that's not what our conversation here is really about. And so I think it'd be a lot of fun to have more of those conversations, not just with Christians, but spiritual people as a whole, just anybody. But for the sake of once again asking, is this something that we're just superimposing on life to get somewhere? Is this actually causing more conflict for me in the long run? I think that would be the two most important questions we could ask of anybody who is religious or spiritual. What is it exactly that you're trying to add to your life? And what's the cost? Because there is one, whether you like it or not. Like, you could be a Buddhist. The cost of that is looking up to Buddha, right? And you could say, well, Buddha was a good dude. Yeah, who said put no head above your own? Right? That was the whole point. He didn't want you looking up to him. But if you label yourself as a Buddhist, you're gonna. Right? So I think it would be a fun series to have. I think that there would be, I guess, some degree of not drama, but I could see a few people getting upset because, again, like, the basis of spirituality is often trying to make yourself feel better. at the end of the day. So we're thinking about it, I guess, is where I was going to go with that. Are you familiar with the 7 Spiritual Laws of Success by Deepak? I have not read that one. I've read a lot of books by Deepak, though. Yeah, I think where I would, the title in itself explains why I haven't read that book.
Yeah, that's pretty intense. 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. It's a lot of interesting S's.
Well,
right
spiritual laws,
Yeah.
success, the
Yes.
fact that there are miraculously 7,
Mhm.
like, and I know from doing a lot of ad copy and a lot of marketing, like that title, really good. It's a really good title
Mhm.
for selling books. Absolutely.
Mhm.
7 laws of success. Like there's just 7 and they're laws and they're spiritual. It's just, it sounds so good.
Mhm.
It sounds so promising.
Mhm.
Only 7. I can learn that in an afternoon.
That's doable.
You know?
Oh my gosh, that, like, right there with the books and whatnot, and like, oh, if I just listen to this, oh, if I just watch this, oh, if I just read this, that's gonna be the answer. If I just believe this, that's gonna be the answer. And it's like, if I just, look to this person, that's gonna be the answer. And it's not. It's not the case. Like, you're on your own with everything. The the assumption that you could read a 200-page book and like know something more afterwards. It's like, yeah, you can learn some stuff in there, but that also doesn't mean anything about you. Like, and everything becomes so much more full when it's not about you, because then there's so much more opportunity to like learn things and try new things and explore new stuff, like explore new experiences when it isn't. And like, reading when I'm not thinking about how I'm reading or how I'm doing is a lot easier too. It's all like life gets lighter. And it's not easier. It's not like just good feelings. It's all feelings, but it's at least that you can show up as yourself. You can show up moment to moment as you are. Like, that's kind of the trade, but it's not that hit of like, when you think about yourself, you get to feel good necessarily, because that isn't necessary to the experience that you're having. It takes you away from the experience that you're having. So of course it's not necessary.
Exactly. It's like one of the things I really enjoy about our outings, for example, karaoke and whatnot in Nanaimo. I don't consider myself to be a very likable person, and I don't mean that I'm not likable. What I mean is that I don't care. But once upon a time, I cared very much, and I curated everything I did in order to be a nice and empathetic and compassionate and accepting and all that shit. I really did try to be, a likable person. And what it did was it created such stress and such pressure on me that I ended up falling into depressive episodes. I'd end up being a little bit more snappy. I'd end up being a little bit more resentful when people weren't looking at me as the nice person I was trying to be, because I really wasn't being that person. Right. And so now I'm just like, well, I am who I am. And because I don't need people to like me, and because I don't care if they don't like me, I am authentically myself, which means that there's no pressure, which means I'm so much happier to talk to them, regardless of who they are, because there's no pressure. Why would I not celebrate the opportunity to express myself if there's no pressure? But it's the pressure. And so I find it really funny that I'm at a point in my life now where there's a number of people who see me at the bar. They go, "Oh shit, it's Ray," and they come over and they say hi, and they're really happy to see me, and they're doing all that, and that's all the result of me not doing anything at all. On the same token, there's a number of people, not really in my life, but online especially, who fucking hate me. They just hate me with a passion. The amount of like vitriol and anger that comes across in the comment section is just uncanny. But I'm okay with that too, because that also comes from being okay with myself. Because anybody who's not okay with themselves, anybody who's looking to God for judgment and forgiveness, all of that, is going to hate somebody who's not. Because you're invalidating everything that they do for some sense of peace that you're already experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like, and so you can have an aversion to someone just being themselves. You can feel like this aversion because like it's invalidating your perspective of there being a right way, that you're doing the right thing or the correct thing or a good job at what you're doing. And just like, oh my God. And again, it's like, don't make it about yourself. Just don't make it about yourself. And it doesn't mean you can't talk about your experiences or things as like growth and learning opportunities.
Well, your palette, right?
Yeah.
Those are the colors that you get to talk about and express yourself through, is everything you've ever experienced.
Mm-hmm.
But that's different than talking about them like they have something to do with your value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And assuming that they do can tie you right up. Because, there's definitely been a side of me. It's like, different. You said you're different in person than online. That perception. It's like, me too, from another perception. And again, it's not like black and white, but it's certainly like I used online not as a means necessarily of expressing myself authentically. It was, to the degree
that you
are.
can. But that's the recognition, is that it's to the degree that you can. Online's a different environment. Online is straight up a different environment. How can you truly communicate who you are in a 60-second to a 3-minute clip? You can't. How can you stop people from making assumptions about you from a 60-second to a 3-minute clip? You can't. Which is why we have the podcast. But even there, people make assumptions after hours and hours, sometimes hundreds of hours of listening to us. Mm-hmm. But in your life, at least you're there. It's your mannerisms. It's the way you stand. It's the way you act. You're there fully in yourself. It's not such a limited form of communication. And I think that that's why it's totally reasonable to not be able to express who you are online. People forget that. It doesn't matter who you're following. You're not seeing them. You're seeing the parts of them that made it to social media, right? If you were with them, you'd see a totally different thing. That's not because they're trying to hide themselves. That's because there's no choice.
Yeah, none. And so again, you can try and be sure of things and be black and white about things, but it's like every person you see, every video that pops up on your, Instagram feed, like that's not the person that's on the, like that's the version on the screen. And even the words that they say right there, say it is 30 seconds. Like that's 30 seconds of them. And having more of an opportunity, and this is the same with virtual reality, more of an opportunity to control that perception, more sense of, because again, it's not control. It's a sense of control.
Yep.
It's a feeling of control. Because I can say firsthand for sure, like I've posted videos, throughout the last 4 years that like, when I posted it, I was feeling good about how I came around, and now I look at them and I feel differently because I see myself, I don't know, more, not more clearly. Because again, it's not even that. It's not like less or more. It's not. It's gray. It's all gray. It's all gray, and it's moment to moment. It's day to day. It's experience to experience. Like it's not something that you've been. It's not black and white. Like you're not in something or experiencing something specific or on this like insider club or outsider club. It's like it's a sliding spectrum, and it's just how much are you making it about you? How much are you making your life and your experiences and your interactions about you first versus the entirety of the experience? And you don't have to make it about you. And if you're used to that, then when you feel like you're letting go of making things about you, like the thoughts that you may have in response to that, if they're about you, like those are just the habitual sort of responses to things, the focuses on it and that sense of control. But like one way or the other, there isn't. And so you don't have to make it that wholehearted focus, assuming that you even know what you're showing or expressing online or in person. It's like there's an equal amount. Like control isn't more, or online isn't more controlled. It's equally as not controlled as reality. You just feel
more
like
so, I'd say, to some degree.
Yeah, it's more.
I mean, nothing has meaning until you give it so. And then you turn that nothing into something that means something about you, whether that's good or bad. And so everything is just everything. Everything is here. It is all potential. And it's difficult to make potential into the bad guy when if anything could happen, why is it that we're so afraid of one particular specific hypothetical happening? If we're so afraid of everything, we're so afraid of the potential, it's like, are we, or are we just afraid of one specific hypothetical that we think is going to happen because we said it's because we're afraid of it, because we're most afraid of it. But we are coming close to the end of our DU Raw, and I just wanted to thank everybody for being here with us, and thank you for not needing us to be here, and thank you for letting us show up as is with no expectations. But we do have Patreon coming up right after this, so please join us, and we'd love to chat with you.
So
it is
it's a
Monday.
Tier 1 plus call. So that means all tiers, $5 a month. You can join us on Patreon.
Yes, we'll be there at the top of the hour.
Nope, 15 minutes.
15. Shit, blew that one.
The top of the half hour. So the bottom of the hour. We'll be there at the bottom of the hour.
That's right.
Amen. Looking forward to it. This has been a fun episode, and we'll talk to everyone soon.
Oh, one final announcement before we leave. If you can, please go to podcastawards.com. Dualistic Unity is actually in the running for 6 categories this year: religion and spirituality, health, leisure, society, best male hosted podcast,
Indeed.
and the People's Choice Award. And so we would really appreciate it if you could just go to the website, vote for us before July 31st. It takes all of 3 minutes. It's totally free to register. It goes a long way towards helping the relationship spread. I got a comment, somebody commenting on my Goku t-shirt. Thank you so much for mentioning that. We will see you